We've been in a movie series for a little while, and I've just been having so much fun, I just keep doing it. So we're going to do it one more time in August, and then we'll switch to a new topic. But we've been learning from movies. There's a lot we can learn from. And the movie that I've been talked about last week and then this week is this one called The Shack. Now, it's controversial in religious circles. Just so you know, there are a lot of Christians who blog against this movie. They hate this movie, and they got lots and lots of opinions. And I read those so that I can have an understanding of what they're saying. But I think the spiritual themes in this that are good and so powerful are worth exploring. And one of the major themes of the movie, if you've ever seen it, is the theme of forgiveness. So if you haven't seen the movie, it's the story of this man, Mackenzie. So Mackenzie is raised in a very abusive home. His dad is a violent alcoholic who literally whips him, beats his mom, and the only way he thinks he can survive as a young teenage boy is to kill his dad. So he poisons his dad's beer, his alcohol. And nobody ever finds out. He gets away with murder and saves his mom. So he grows up with this deep secret. And then he has his own family, gets married, has 3 kids, and one day takes those 3 kids camping. His wife can't come, and so they're out at the campsite, and you see the lake, and his 2 oldest kids are out in a canoe on the lake, and he's sitting at the campsite with his youngest daughter, and all of a sudden, the kids on the lake are screwing around in the canoe, and they tip it over, and the boy is trapped under the canoe, and he's drowning. And so Mackenzie has to dive into the water, swim out to save his oldest son. But while he's doing that, a sexual predator, is watching, and the moment everyone's attention is on the waterfront, the predator grabs his daughter, kidnaps her. And they can't find, the police come out and hunt. Now, way up in the middle of the woods, in the middle of nowhere, they find this old shack, and in the old shack, they find her dress, and they find blood. They never find her body, and they never find the killer. And one of the major themes of the movie is God's call to forgive in the middle of overwhelming pain. It's one of the major themes of the movie. How in the world do you forgive that? And that's what's explored, and I think it is an incredibly powerful message to explore, because the reality is all of us have things in our life, situations in our life where we've been hurt. And there isn't a person I'm talking to today who isn't carrying some pain, and many of you're carrying big things from your past. And what happens is we become bitter, and as psychology today defined it, bitterness, which I define as a chronic and pervasive state of smoldering resentment. Isn't that a descriptive phrase? Smoldering resentment. It's one of the most destructive and toxic of all human emotions. Do you have smoldering resentment toward anyone in your life today from something that happened in your past? I could put so many things on a slide like this. You ever been rejected by somebody who should have just loved you, or betrayed by a spouse, or criticized by a friend, or judged by someone at a church? Ever had a false accusation by a coworker or a friend? Ever had unfair treatment by a parent? I could just fill slides with this, right? With all kinds of examples of things where we get hurt, and we've all been hurt. I was reading, as I was prepping this story, I read the true story of a man whose wife had a secret spending addiction. She ordered credit cards and never told her husband. It's like, where did you think this was going to go? But again, you don't think about it when you're in the middle of it, right? So she kept buying it, and she would lie to her husband about purchases, say, oh, my mom bought this for me. Oh, my grandma bought this for me. Well, eventually, it all came out. Once all her credit cards were maxed out and she couldn't pay the bills. And when her husband found out what had happened, and they added up how much debt she'd run up, they had to sell their house. Can you imagine that? Surprise! I've been lying to you. I've been doing things behind your back. And now, because of my choices, we don't even get to stay in our home anymore. Can you imagine the pain that he's dealing with? And along comes a pastor like me and says, hey, Jesus says forgive. How do you do that? How do you forgive? It is one of the most important things in life. I got to tell you, I learned so much prepping for today's message. So much that I've never known. I've always known there was more to forgiveness than what I've ever taught. I always knew it. And this week in prepping, I learned so much new. I couldn't wait for you to be here, wait for us to have a conversation about this, because this is just essential, what we're talking about. I want to ask you to grab your program. We're in this series, and open it up, take out the notes. We're going to talk about how to forgive, especially when you've really been hurt. And that describes, pretty much all of us. So I want to ask you to grab your notes, grab a pen. Welcome to those you're watching online. So glad you have decided to watch this one. On our website at penielchurchlife.com are the notes for free. You can download them and follow along. Such an important message. Let's jump right into this. First, you have to understand the incredible price of bitterness. I mean, there is such a staggering price attached to bitterness. And we do not understand it. I did not understand the full extent of bitterness until the last 2 weeks of my life. Did not understand it. In the movie, they really portray this. If you ever watched the movie, you'll see what happens when a human being becomes bitter. Mackenzie is so bitter about the loss of his daughter, and he wants to find the man who killed her, and he wants to kill him. He wants that man dead. Later, he tells God, I want that man to burn in hell forever. There's just so much bitterness. And can you blame him? The guy killed and tortured his little girl. I mean, oh my goodness, I can't even imagine what I would want to do to a person who did that to one of my kids. And bitterness is just toxic to him. It's costing him his relationship with his wife, with his other 2 children, with his friends. It's just destroying his life. And that's what bitterness does. Bitterness has a tremendous impact on our life. There's a story that Jesus told to illustrate this. There's a story in the Bible where he said there was a man who came to a king one day. He was brought before the king because he owed 10,000 talents. Well, that's their dollar amount. So we don't deal in doubt. You don't open up your wallet or purse today and take out a talent. So it's like their dollars. Do you know how much 10,000 talents was? This is how much he owed. 10,000 talents. 375 tons of silver. Do you know how long it would take him to pay that debt back? 200,000 years of labor. Okay, so he's in big trouble, right? Because he's not living 200,000 years. He will never repay this debt. That's the point of the story. It is an unpayable debt that he has gotten into. So as you can see in the story, he's on his knees and he's begging the king, please have mercy on me because I'll pay it back. Will he ever pay it back? No shot. There is no way to pay this debt back. And the king knows it. Incredibly, the king in the story is gracious and says, I cancel the debt. Now, forgiveness is never free, right? It cost that king 375 tons of silver to cancel the debt. He had to let it go. Incredibly, he does, and the guy is overjoyed. Can you imagine? I mean, how happy would you be if somebody just canceled your mortgage or your car payment? I'm paying that for you. Well, this is way more than that. 200,000 years of labor gone. So he goes out overjoyed, and incredibly, in the story that Jesus is telling, he finds a guy who owes him 3 months of wages. And nothing compared to what he owed, right? Nothing. And do you know what he does in the story? He grabs the guy. Now, the picture's wrong because it shows him grabbing his shirt. No, in the Bible, he grabs the guy around the throat. He grabs him by the throat and starts to shake him and says, pay me what you owe me. And the guy on his knees literally uses the same words that guy just used with the king. He's like, hey, give me time. I promise I'll pay this back. And you know what the guy who's just been forgiven this unbelievable debt does? He says, no. He has him thrown into prison, which is what the king wanted to do to that guy. He has him thrown into prison until he pays back every single dollar. Now, some of the servants of the king who've just witnessed this horrific thing, they go right back to the king and they tell him everything that just happened. And the king is outraged. He turns to his soldiers and says, go get that guy. You bring him back here right now. And so they drag him back in and he's like, are you kidding me? I just forgave you an unpayable debt. Shouldn't you have shown some kindness to people who owed nothing compared to what I just forgave you of, right? And he says, because of this, it says, here's how Jesus finishes the story. Then the angry king sent the man to prison to be tortured until he had paid his entire debt. So this is an incredible story. And then Jesus turns it around and he makes it personal for all of his listeners. And he says this, look at this. That's what my heavenly Father will do to you if you refuse to forgive your brothers or sisters from your heart. So it's not an artificial forgiveness from your heart. This is real forgiveness. He says, if you will not forgive, you'll be tortured. You'll be tortured. You will be, this is where one of the things that I learned this week that I was teaching wrong in the past. I used to, when I teach on forgiveness, I would say, it's like in our minds, we have people in jail cells. And forgiveness is opening the jail cell and letting them out. I'm wrong. Totally wrong about that. You know who's in the jail cell? I am. When I am bitter and I don't forgive anyone, I voluntarily step into the jail cell and pull the door shut behind me. And from my jail cell, I rant and rave against them. It's like, someday you're going to pay. Someday you're going to pay. And I'm the one in prison. Because that's what bitterness does. It imprisons us in our own torturous cell of our own making. That's what it does. And you can see this anywhere. You research it, go to Mayo Clinic website. This is right from the Mayo Clinic website. Physical effects of becoming bitter towards someone who's hurt you: higher blood pressure, weakened immune system, damaged heart. If you go look online at mental consequences of bitterness, rumination. You know what that is? Some of you do it all the time. You literally replay conversations with somebody that you're not talking to over and over again in your mind. Sometimes you say it out loud, and you are so mad at them and so angry with them. Have you ever been alone having an imaginary conversation with someone from the past who hurt you? What you wish you would have said or what you would like to say to them now? Ever done that? That's rumination. You're damaging your own brain. You're literally setting neural pathways deeper and deeper and deeper into the pain. It's like you're grabbing those bars inside your own cell and you're just holding on tighter. It damages our brain by diminished memory because it releases cortisol, the stress chemical, which atrophies our brain. In other words, you have a harder time remembering things. It also amplifies all other negative emotions. So, for instance, if I have a wound right here on my arm and you brush against it accidentally, even if it's accidental, what am I going to do? I'm going to go, ow, right? Because I'm wounded and not healing. And that's what the idea is, so people keep bumping into us because that's as human beings, and they get a huge reaction, not because what they did was that big a deal, but because we're already wounded and we've never healed. There's just tremendous consequences for becoming bitter, but these aren't even the biggest ones of all. The biggest ones of all I talked about last week, and I explained when I showed you this verse, and this verse scared me. This verse scared me. 1 John, he said, no one has ever seen God. But if we love each other, God lives in us, and his love is brought to full expression in us. So look at what God is offering. He is offering himself to you. He's offering to come and live inside of you. And not just come and live like a resident who doesn't do anything. Look what he's offering. He wants to bring the fullness of his love inside you and me. And I asked you this last week. When was the last time you felt deeply loved by God? Some of you don't even know what the words mean. Because if I said, when was the last time you went to a church service? Yeah, I get that. When was the last time you may have prayed? Yeah, right before a meal. That's not what I'm asking. When was the last time you experienced the love of God in your life? Because that's what the promise is in the Bible, is that you can experience God's love. When was the last time you experienced his love in your life? And he says, here's what he wants to do: move inside of our lives and bring his love so that we feel deeply loved by God, but it's a conditional promise. This 2-letter word is essential. It only happens if we love each other. That's it. If we don't love people in our lives, then none of the promises happen. Then you won't experience the full expression of his love in your life. So I know that Christians really struggle with this. So flip your notes over in the back, and I wrote this at the top on the back of your notes. And I want you to really think about this. Because if I put down, who do you hate? Many Christians are like, oh, I don't hate anyone. Great. Okay, that's good. I'm glad you don't hate them. But who do you not like? Who do you not like? Now, all of a sudden, that question changes things. Who do you not like? So, because the command in the Bible isn't, it's not to tolerate, well, I don't like them. That's good, right? Because I don't hate them. It's not the command in the Bible. The command in the Bible is to love them. He says, if you love, and it makes sense, right? Our God is a being of pure love. If he wants to come and make his home inside of me and I get to experience his love, then I have to be loving. And anytime I tolerate anything other than love, I turn down the dial on my ability to experience the God of love inside me. Does that make sense? I'm turning the dial down so that I don't get to experience his love anymore. So you don't have to write the names now, especially if you're sitting by someone who makes you uncomfortable. I've had a week to write the names. I have 15 names. 15 names going back to when I was 9 years old. I wonder if you think about it, how many names you would put on that list of people that I don't hate them. That's not the command. I don't love them, so it's right in between, right? How many names would you put down? You got to understand, every time you put a name in that list, every time you turn down the dial on your ability to experience the overwhelming love of God. You just turn it down. To me, that's the biggest cost of bitterness, because we don't get to experience God in this world. So number 2, what do we do then? Well, you gotta humanize that person that you've said that you don't really like. You gotta humanize them. I read a book about forgiveness, and the author was talking about this. This is what we do. When somebody hurts me, I dehumanize them. They are less than me and less than a human. And usually what we do is we emphasize, like this said, we reduce that human being to a single characteristic. So it could be they're rude, they're crazy, they're awful, they're selfish, they're heartless, they're stupid. Do you have anyone labeled with anything like this in your life? I mean, when you look at the list, first make the list of the people that you don't really love them, but you don't hate them. It's somewhere in between. Okay, but the command is to love, and if you put anyone on this lower shelf, you turn down the experience of God's love. Okay, so what label do you put on them? I've got a lot of labels. When I was stunned to see how big this list was, then, having the advantage of thinking about it for a week, I was stunned to see then what labels go, because the labels come next, and we start labeling these people, and a fascinating research project was done recently. You can read about this online. They took Americans, and they put this little chart, and those little circles in the thing that they did online, they move. And the description up above, you don't have to read it, but what they were saying is they were asked Americans to say, how evolved are all these other societies compared to us as Americans? How evolved are they? The fascinating outcome, 2 of those groups below were rated by Americans to be less than us. Want to guess which 2 on the list? Muslims and Arabs. It was a stunning outcome. We literally, as America, think that people are less than us. They're less than us. But it's also what we do with people who seriously hurt us. We label them and move them down the spot where they are less than us. You know who never does that? God never does that with any human being on earth, ever. If you want to read something interesting in your Bible this week, go read in Matthew chapter 25. And when you get to verse 36, one of the things that Jesus commends people for is for doing prison ministry. Going and visiting someone in prison just because you want to show them kindness. I don't know if you've ever done that. I've done it probably a dozen times in my life, where I've gone into prison just to visit some people and show kindness or bring them something. Wait, you have to go through right channels, like a cake with a knife. No, nothing like that. Like your Bible or, Bible study things. So, yeah, that sounded weird coming out of my mouth. Bring them things. But one of the things that Jesus says that he's going to commend people for is for doing that. And you know why? Because despite what they've done that put them in prison, their behavior, they stole from somebody. They beat somebody up. They raped. They took someone's life. Despite the behavior, God never stops looking at them as a human being. He never loses sight of their humanity. Nobody's behavior causes God to lose sight of their humanity. But we do this all the time. We do this all the time. There is an amazing story about this man. So chances are you've never heard of him. Bishop Malusi, and I can't even pronounce his last name. He's from South Africa. So if you know your history, you know the history of apartheid in South Africa. Horrific. It was their racism society. Whites owned the government. Whites owned all the power, and so white people were justified in their own minds at doing anything they want. Confiscate property of black people, didn't care, didn't repay them. Rape black women, didn't matter. Violence against black people, didn't matter. So there was no justice. There was tremendous abuse. He was one of the men who spoke out against apartheid in South Africa. So you know what they did? Do you know what they did in those days? They arrested him, threw him in prison, and began to torture him. Torture him. This is what they did. Incredibly, after apartheid fell apart, there wasn't a civil war in South Africa because of people and religious leaders like him. While he was being tortured, he literally said, I had this astonishing insight. These people, these men and women torturing me right now, he said, they are God's children and they're losing touch with their humanity. We need to help them recover it. Can you believe that? That's not what I'd be thinking. That was not what I'd be thinking. And he's like, we can't lose sight of their humanity. He and other spiritual leaders like Desmond Tutu and others transformed the nation in unity and forgiveness. And part of the reason they were able to do it is because they believed two things. There is nothing that cannot be forgiven. Do you believe that? Do you believe that? That there is nothing that cannot be forgiven. And the second thing is there's no one, look at that, undeserving of forgiveness. Do you believe that? There's nothing that can't be forgiven, and there's no one undeserving from forgiveness. And again, you're talking about people who were imprisoned, and they had their property confiscated, and they had their family members raped, tortured, or killed. And they're standing here saying, we need to reunite as a nation, and here's why, because nothing can't be forgiven, and there's no one undeserving of forgiveness. Do you believe this? And they transformed a nation. So the key to this is to always remember that we separate someone's behavior from their personhood. I may not agree with the behavior and the choices you're making. It does not in any way diminish your humanity. Because every single person, as a matter of fact, I really want you to do this. Think about one of the people that you would put on your list. One of the people. Just one. One person who hurt you from your past. Have them in your mind and understand this. That person who hurt me, who took from me, is cherished by God. One of his own special creations. He sent that person to earth for a special purpose. And they may not be living it out, but it doesn't change that. And God, this person is someone that God wants to heal and bless and restore. And no behavior they have ever participated in stops any of that. Is that the label you have on the people who've taken from you? Is that the label? God never loses sight of their humanity despite their behavior. Have we? So, number 3, to real steps to actually doing this, we have to actually consider what we've lost. I'm just going to give you this in just a real short piece because I want to get to the next one. You've got to really think about what you've lost. Because I sometimes get a little nervous, and my experience when you see somebody who's had a tremendous loss and then the next day in the news they're like, I forgive them. It's like, whoa. I mean, it's a good thing to say and it's the right path to go down, but it's really quick. Have you really thought about what you've lost? My experience is when I try and forgive without doing this, it doesn't work very well. You have to be honest about your pain, and I want you to write that down on your notes. You really need to think about what their behavior has taken from you. Because forgiveness needs to really think about what you're actually forgiving them for. And what I've learned in life is this: a harm felt but denied will always find a way to express itself. Have you learned that? When you get hurt and you're deeply hurt, and you're just like, I'm just going to move on. It's okay. It's no big deal. A harm that is felt but denied will always find a way. And usually it comes out in either depression or addiction. If you're struggling with some addiction that you just can't shake, so many times underlying that addiction is a harm that you will not face. We just need to be honest about our pain. So how do we do this? Flip your notes over in the back. I wrote how to journal about your pain, and I'm a big believer in this. I do it all the time. Journal, I either write it out in a journal or I type it up in my computer on my laptop, but you don't have to. You can use these questions and talk to a trusted person who's really like a spiritual mentor for you. You can just talk through these 3 sections. Start with the facts, who did what happened, when did it happen, how did it happen, and then use an emotions chart to answer these questions. What am I feeling? Write it down, talk about it. Why am I feeling this way? Write it out. And if you Google chart of emotions, there's tons of them. I still use one today. I've been using one for over 10 years. Here's what we know from neuroscience. When you name the painful emotion, do you know what happens in the emotional centers of your brain? They calm down. Did you know that? God wired your brain to calm down when you name the emotion. You know what I'm feeling? I'm really feeling embarrassed. That embarrassed me so much. Or I'm really feeling taken advantage of. And giving name to what you feel, it's like your body's just agitated until you name it, and then it goes, oh, finally, they're listening. It's like you've got to name it to heal from it. And then there are questions you can ask. But you really need to think about what price you're paying in order to forgive someone, because then you're ready to go to step 4. Now you can transfer that debt to God. Now you can transfer the debt to God. In every moment of your pain, you have 2 options. Every moment, everything from your past that hurts you, every person in your life that you really don't love, but you don't hate them, they're in that middle group. Every single moment of your life where you've had this, you have 2 options. You can forgive them and heal and move on, or you can become a debt collector. You can become a debt collector. You're going to make them pay. And by the way, every debt collector lives in the same place, prison. Every one of them lives in prison. You are voluntarily stepping into the prison cell, slamming it shut, and saying from behind the bars, oh yeah, I'm not forgiving you till you paid. Oh yeah, look at them suffer now. Oh no, they're free. Most of the time, they're not even thinking about you. They're living their own life, happy. They give no thought to how much pain they've caused you. You know the only one thinking about it? Just one. I literally step into prison. I literally imprison myself and let them go free thinking, yeah, they're going to suffer now. It makes no sense. And it's what we do all the time. So the key is this. Forgiveness. This is what forgiveness is. It's transferring that injustice or that justice situation to God. I'm not going to get even with them. I'm going to trust that God does this. That's what forgiveness really is. Forgiveness is transferring that it should probably say injustice to God. That makes more sense, right? And again, Jesus is our model for all of this. Look at this verse from 1 Peter. Peter said Jesus didn't retaliate when he was insulted. He didn't threaten revenge when he suffered. He left his case in the hands of God, who always judges fairly. Do you hear what he says? Do you know Jesus was, according to the book of Colossians, Jesus was God among us. The Bible says about Jesus that he was the one who created everything. Matter of fact, he sustains it all with his power. So in other words, those people who are doing all those awful things to Jesus can be very glad that I don't have his power. They can be very glad that I don't have his power. Because Jesus stood in front of people who mocked him and insulted him, and he had the power to do something. He could have snapped his fingers and turned every single one of them into a little frog and squished them with his sandal, right? He could have turned them into a bug. And what does it say? He didn't retaliate. He didn't threaten. Where did he leave his case? He left his case in the hands of God, his Father, who judges fairly. And that's what forgiveness is. When you've been hurt, the scales of justice are tipped out of balance. And getting even is evening the scales, right? If you get even, you're going to make things right. You're evening the scales. I'm going to get even with them. It's amazing how many of our movies and TV shows are all about getting even. It's just an unbelievable theme in our society. I'm going to get even. I'm going to get even. And God says it's not our place to get even. It's our place to transfer that debt that was created into his hands. He'll do what's right, and we forgive him. And we forgive him by saying the words. That's what he wants us to do. I probably have read this before, this next sentence, but for whatever reason, when I read it on Monday this last week, it hit me harder than I've ever thought about it. Maybe it's because I was making this list. Maybe it was because I started making the list. I don't know. But I read this on Monday and I couldn't get over it. Forgiveness means letting go of all hopes for a better past. And for whatever reason, it hit me like I've never been hit before. So now I'm really ridiculous. Okay, I am ridiculous. I'm standing in a jail cell with 15 people outside, enjoying life, doing whatever they want to do. And I am thinking, oh yeah, I'm collecting this debt and I'm staying in this prison cell till they pay me back, hoping that someday they can make my past better. Does that make sense to any other human being listening to me today? And we do it all the time. We do it all the time. There's nothing that can be done about that. So Christians really get struggly here, and they're like, wait a second, are you saying that what they did to me doesn't matter? Oh, no, I'm not. We're transferring that debt. They owe you a debt, but we're giving it to God. Another thing Christians say all the time is, okay, so now I've forgiven them. Does that mean I have to be their best friend? And that is not true at all. There are 3 different processes in the Bible. Whenever I talk about forgiveness, I remind you, forgiveness is all about the past, and it only takes one person to forgive, you. That's it. And when you forgive, the crazy thing is you're actually opening your own jail cell so you can come out and live again. Crazy. It only takes one to forgive. It's all about the past. Reconciliation is about the present. Do we want to be friends? Do we want to work together again? What do we want? That takes 2. Usually requires somebody owns something in it. Although there is a proverb about this saying, sometimes love causes you just to overlook an offense so that the relationship can remain strong. So there is another aspect to that. Sometimes you've beat your head against a wall and it just doesn't make sense and you just overlook the offense, forgive them, and move on and keep the relationship. But then the last one is trust them. Do you ever trust them? I don't know. It depends. That's future. And that comes when they show through their actions that they are trustworthy. This was a hard thing for me to learn. Don't just trust people. I'm a trusting man. Don't just trust people. Trust is always earned. So if somebody's really harmed you and they come back in your life, they want to make things right, well, have they owned what they did? Then you can reconcile. Well, should you trust them? Trust is earned. I have no problem with someone saying to me, I don't trust you. What I would say is, well, would you give me the opportunity to build that trust back? Tell me what I've done that's violated. How could I make it better in the future? Because trust is earned. Another question that Christians struggle with is, shouldn't we only forgive them when they've apologized? I had a man argue with me about this one for a long time. No, you only forgive them when they apologize. You only forgive them when they apologize. Here is the problem with this sentence. Let's go, well, actually, the first problem with this sentence is this. Literally, imagine where you are if you won't forgive someone. Where are you at? You're in prison, right? So you're standing behind the bar saying, oh no, I am not going to forgive them until they come and apologize. Oh, great. So you're going to let people who are out living their own life, ignoring you, having a great time, keep you in jail? You're going to let them keep controlling you and hurting you, and they've moved on. Why would you do that? That makes no sense. But the other problem is when you look at the life of Jesus, he didn't live that way. When Jesus was hanging on the cross, he literally was surrounded by people who had, mocked him and insulted him and lied about him and betrayed him. And he was hanging on the cross after being beaten by soldiers and a crown of thorns shoved on his face. And they took his clothes and they were gambling at his feet and they were mocking him, making fun of him. And what did Jesus say? I'm not forgiving any of you. Oh, I can't do that. I'm not forgiving any of you till you apologize. Is that what Jesus said from the cross? He said, Father, forgive them. And then he even made an excuse for them. They just don't know what they're doing. You don't wait. Jesus didn't wait. Jesus didn't wait. We can't wait either. I put this prayer on the back right in the middle, and I'm not going to read through it now, but it's a prayer you can pray. And this is all about you and I moving forward, making the decision to forgive the people that are on our list of people that we don't love. whatever word you want to use. And then one last thing, I just want you to write this down. I'm just going to take a second to talk about this one. Now, what you do is after you say the words, I forgive them, and you follow that model, I forgive them, then you start to pray for them. And I want to show you. Sometimes, I'm telling you right now, this is really hard for me to tell you. This is really hard for me to tell you. Jesus actually said this: do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who mistreat you. That's what Jesus said. And all I'm saying is just take the last one, just pray for them. Right? But that's not what Jesus said, is it? Jesus said this: hey, when someone treats you hatefully, when they take from you and take so much, you know what I want you to do? I want you to do good to them. When someone curses you and they gossip about you and they tell all these stories about you behind your back and they hurt you so bad, you know what I want you to do? I want you to return that curse with blessing. I want you to pray a prayer of blessing for that person. And let those words come out of your mouth when they're letting other types of words come out of their mouth. And Jesus said, when someone treats you terribly and they mistreat you and they hurt you so bad, I want you to pray for them. That's what Jesus said. And there's a reason he said it. Every time Jesus asked for something hard, remember, he actually told us that you and I are supposed to get to the place where we love our enemies. That's his quote. Do you love your enemies? Do you love the people who've taken so much from you in your life? Do you love them? It's not, no, okay, I'm okay because I don't hate them, I just don't like them. Oh no, that's not the bar. The bar is, do you love them? Do you love the people who've taken from you and hurt you? As one author said, it's forgiveness that creates a world where we don't withhold our love from anyone. And then you know what you get? You get the God of love here. The prison cell swings open. You step into light, and you step into love, and you step into freedom. And the God of love can now put his love inside you so you could experience his love and power in ways you never have. He wants, on its surface, loving your enemies sounds like the stupidest thing you could ever do. But God, out of love, is saying, oh no, it's an invitation to real life. It's the invitation to real life. So honestly, I had to do some apologizing to God this week. Every single name on my list represents my failure to obey Jesus. Every single name. And the second thing is, every single name on this list is an indication of how many bricks I've put in the wall between God, the God of love, and my own life. Every single one. Every name. It's just it's me pushing him further and further and further away. And when I saw all of this clearly this week, I had some apologies to God. I've held grudges. The stupidest thing is, I willingly walked into the prison cell and slammed the door shut behind me. I did that. And when I saw all of this for the first time, I apologized to him. It is in my power to choose to do what Jesus said, and every single name on this list is going to be forgiven. I'm transferring every debt to him because I want the full life that he offers me. I want all of his life, and I don't want to spend one more second in my own prison. I don't want any of it. So my question is it time for some of you to apologize to God? Are there people you have on that list that you don't, it's not that I don't love them, Brian, it's okay, I don't hate them. That's not the command. He asks us to get to the point where we even love our enemies. Do you love your enemies? Do you love those who've done harm to you? That's where we have to go. If you're just exploring Jesus with us here or watching online and exploring him, The truth is, here's the real truth. That story I told you earlier from Jesus about the guy who was forgiven a debt of 375 tons of silver, 200,000 years of labor he owed that king. We're that servant. We are that servant. I have been unloving in this world, and every time I've hurt a human being, every time I've hurt God Almighty, I've accumulated a debt with him I could never repay. And what was taking place on the cross this day, 2,000 years ago, was my debt was being paid in full. And the king, on his throne, I was 14 years old, sitting in a little church in Ellsworth, Wisconsin, when someone explained what Jesus had done, that he had taken my place on that cross, paid my debt. And that day, I bowed my head in that church, and I asked Jesus to forgive me. And the king, incredibly on the throne, said, "Debt is paid in full, all gone. Brian Rudesill owes no debt to me. My entire debt was paid in full." And then I became the servant who ran out of there and grabbed people by the throat and said, "Yeah, you owe me." Let me have you bow your heads. All of us are that servant. We owe a debt to a God that we can never repay, and Jesus paid it all. So the first thing is, for those of you who are just exploring your faith with us here or online, the first decision is to let Jesus Christ cancel your debt, because he died on the cross for it. And if you want that debt canceled, just ask Jesus. Say, "Jesus, would you please forgive me? I've been unloving. I've brought so many unloving words and actions into this world, and I confess them to you, so please forgive me. Cancel my debt." But some of you, with your head bowed, it's time, because you have faces of people, names of people that are on that list that you do not love, and your decision to hold that has imprisoned you and pushed God's love away. And today, you can make that decision with your own will. You can say, "God, that hurt like crazy. When I even think of this person, I don't like them at all, and I cancel this debt. They don't owe it to me. They owe it to you. I choose to forgive them. Let me experience your love in my life now." In Jesus' name, amen. As we finish up today, I know this has been a challenging message. A lot of things could be going on inside, and you have this little connection card, and this is how you communicate with us. Maybe there's something you want us to pray about. Some of you, this was a big thing because you know you got some work to do. There are some people in your past who've really hurt you, and you need us to pray for you as you forgive them. You don't have to tell us details. You can just say, "Please pray for me." We have a team of people who pray for you. Others of you may have asked Jesus to forgive you or renewed your commitment. Let us know about that decision. And then what you do is drop it in one of the 2 offering boxes back on the back wall where you came in. Thanks so much for coming today, and I hope to see you again in 2 weeks.